Hello everyone, welcome to Books Mandala's YouTube channel. In this channel, we talk about everything and anything related to books. In today's video, we have the summary of the book, The Catcher in the Rye. The Catcher in the Rye is a novel by American author J.D. Salinger. It was published serially in 1945 to 1946 and as a novel in 1951. With more than 65 million copies sold, it is one of the most celebrated literary works of all time. Times magazine has also included it in the list of the 100 best English language novels since 1923. And several other honorary lists. The book revolves around the themes of teenage angst, rebellion, alienation, and is a critique of superficiality in society. Set around the 1950s, the book is narrated by 17-year-old narrator and protagonist Holden Caulfield. Although Holden is not specific about his location while telling the story, he makes it clear that he is undergoing treatment in a mental hospital or a sanatorium. The events he narrates take place over 2 days between the end of fall school term and Christmas when Holden is 16 years old. Holden is sick of people's phoniness, describing the superficiality, hypocrisy, pretension, and shallowness that he encounters in the world around him. Subsequently, he has become an icon of teenage rebellion. Holden's story begins on the Saturday following the end of classes at the Pensy Prep School in Hagerstown, Pennsylvania. Pensy is Holden's fourth school as he has already failed out of 3 others. At Pensy, he has failed 4 out of 5 of his classes and is expelled. Since he is scheduled to go home back to Manhattan on Wednesday, he goes to the home of his history teacher, Mr. Spencer, to say goodbye. Spencer is a well-meaning old man, but when he reprimands Holden for his poor academic performance, Holden gets annoyed and leaves. Back at his dormitory, it is quiet and almost empty. Wearing his red hunting hat, Holden begins to read. His peace is temporary though. A dorm neighbor named Ackley disturbs him. Later, he gets into an argument with his roommate, Stradlater, over a composition that Holden has written for him. It is about Holden's deceased brother, Ali's baseball glove. Stradlater has just returned from a date with Holden's old friend, Jane Gallagher. The 2 roommates get into a fight, with Stradlater winning easily. Holden has had enough of Pensy Prep and catches a train to New York City where he plans to stay at a hotel until Wednesday. On the train to New York, Holden meets the mother of one of his fellow Pensy students. Though he thinks this student is a complete bastard, he tells the women made-up stories about how shy her son is and how respected he is at school. When he arrives at Penn Station, he goes into a phone booth and considers calling several people. But for various reasons, he decides against it. He gets in a cab and asks to go to the Edmond Hotel. He questions the cab driver about where the ducks in Central Park go when the lagoon freezes. This question confuses and ultimately annoys the driver. Holden checks himself into the hotel. His hotel room faces the windows of another wing of the hotel. Through the windows, he observes a man pulling on silk stockings, high heels, a bra, a corset, and an evening gown. He also sees a man and a woman in another room taking turns up spitting mouthfuls of their drinks into each other's faces and laughing hysterically. Holden is both upset and aroused by the activities of the perverts. A couple of cigarettes later, he calls Faith Cavendish, a woman he has never met but whose number he got from an acquaintance at Princeton. He thinks he remembers hearing that she used to be a stripper, and he believes that he can persuade her to sleep with him. He calls her, and although Faith Cavendish is annoyed because of late night call, she suggests they meet the next day. Holden doesn't want to wait that long and hangs up without arranging a meeting. Holden then goes downstairs to the lavender room and sits at a table. But the waiter realizes he's a minor and refuses to serve him. He then flirts with 3 women in their 30s who are only there to catch a glimpse of a celebrity. Holden dances with them and even feels that he is half in love with the blonde woman after seeing how well she dances. He makes some witty remarks about his age and the women leave. Holden has to pay for them. As Holden goes out to the lobby, he starts to think about Jane and recounts how they met. They met while spending a summer vacation in Maine, played golf and checkers, and held hands at the movies. One afternoon, during a game of checkers, Jane's stepfather came onto the porch. After he left, Jane began to cry and Holden had moved to sit beside her. He kissed her all over the face, but she wouldn't let him kiss on her mouth. That was the closest they'd come to necking. Holden leaves the hotel and takes a cab to Ernie's Jazz Club in Greenwich Village. Again, he questions the driver where the ducks in Central Park go in the winter. This cabbie is even more irritable than the first one. At Ernie's, Holden sits alone at a table and observes others with distaste. He runs into Lillian Simons, one of his older brother's ex-girlfriends. She invites him to sit with her and her date, but Holden says that he has to meet someone and leaves. He goes back to Edmond, where his elevator operator, Morris, offers to send a prostitute to Holden's room for $5. Holden agrees. A young woman, Sunny, arrives at his door. She begins to take off her dress. Suddenly, Holden starts to feel peculiar. He tries to make conversation with her. When she gets annoyed, he claims that he recently underwent a spinal operation and hence cannot sleep with her, but offers to pay her anyway. She tries to seduce him, but in vain. He asks her to leave after paying her $5. A little later, Sonny returns to his hotel room with Morris and demands another $5 from Holden. When Holden refuses to pay, Morris punches him in the stomach and leaves him on the floor. Sonny takes $5 from his wallet and they leave. Holden goes to bed at last. The next day, he calls Sally Hayes, an attractive girl he had dated in the past. They arrange to meet for a play. Holden eats breakfast at a sandwich bar where he talks with 2 nuns about Romeo and Juliet. He gives them $10. He tries to call Jane Gallagher, but her mother answers the phone, so he hangs up. He takes a cab to Central Park to look for his younger sister Phoebe, but she isn't there. He helps Phoebe's classmates tighten her skate, and the girl tells him that Phoebe might be in the Museum of National History. He goes there but decides not to go in and instead takes a cab to go and meet Sally. Holden and Sally go to the play and Holden is annoyed that she talks with a boy she knows afterwards. Sally suggests they go to Radio City to ice skate. They both skate poorly and decide to get a table instead. Holden tries to explain to Sally why he is unhappy at school and urges her to run away with him to Massachusetts or Vermont and live in a cabin. When she refuses, he calls her a pain in the ass and laughs at her when she gets angry. Sally ultimately leaves. Holden rings Jane again, but there is no answer. Next, he calls Carl Luce, a young man who had been Holden's student advisor at the Wooton School and now is a student at Columbia University. Holden and Luke meet at a bar. Luke had talked about sex frankly with some boys at school, so Holden tries to draw him into that conversation once more. Irritated by Holden's juvenile remarks about homosexuals and Luke's Chinese girlfriend, Luke leaves. Holden continues to drink alone. Quite drunk, Holden calls Sally and goes on a rant about their Christmas Eve plans. Then he goes to Central Park, where he used to watch the ducks as a child. By the time he finds the lagoon, he is freezing cold. He then decides to sneak into his home and wake his sister Phoebe. He is forced to admit to Phoebe that he was kicked out of school. This makes her mad at him. When he tries to explain why he hates school, Phoebe counters by saying that he does not like anything. He tells her his fantasy of being the catcher in the rye, a person who catches little children as they are about to fall off a cliff. Phoebe tells him that he has misremembered the poem that he took the image from. Robert Burns' poem says that if a body meets a body coming through the rye, not catch a body. Holden then calls his former English teacher, Mr. Antolini, who invites Holden over to his apartment. Mr. Antolini asks Holden about his expulsion and tries to counsel him about his future, but Holden cannot hide his sleepiness. Mr. Antolini puts him to bed on the couch. Holden wakes up to find Mr. Antolini stroking his forehead. Creeped out about this, Holden hastily excuses himself and leaves. He sleeps for a few hours on a bench at Grand Central Station. The next day, Holden goes to Phoebe's school and sends her a note saying that he is leaving home for good. He also asks her to meet him at lunchtime at the museum. Phoebe arrives with a suitcase full of clothes, asking Holden to take her with him. He angrily refuses. Phoebe cries and refuses to speak with him. Knowing that she will follow him, Holden walks to the zoo and takes her across the park to a carousel. He buys her a ticket and watches her ride it. It starts to rain heavily. Watching Phoebe ride the carousel, Holden is so happy that he is close to tearing up. Holden ends his narrative here, telling the reader that he is not going to tell the story of how he went home and got sick. He plans to go to a new school in the fall and is optimistic about his future. Thank you for watching the video. We hope you find this summary useful. You can purchase this book from booksmandala.com. If you liked this video, please consider subscribing to our channel for more bookish content.